Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/IDontWorkHereLady, where Karens assume everyone is a customer and is put on Earth to serve them. And in today's episode, guys, boy, oh boy, a Karen gets violent on OP and makes the worst mistake of her life that lands her in prison. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. Don't shake your heads too hard. And as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So this actually happened a long time ago, but it still amuses me when I remember it. So I thought you guys might like it too. This takes place in the late 90s, and I'm about 12 years old, living at home with my mom, who's the manager of a department of the local hospital at the time. It was before email or texting, and caller ID wasn't much of a thing either. My mom gave out her home phone number for staff to call her at home if there was an emergency. Naturally, her definition of an emergency and theirs did not match up. So one day, my older sister and I were home and the phone rang. My sister was in another room, so I grabbed it and it was Karen from my mom's team. The following mess of a conversation happened. Karen said, "Can I speak to your mom?" To which I say, "Oh, I'm sorry, she's not home. Can I take a message?" I said that because mom had practically coached me to say that every time I took a call for her. Karen said I wanted to ask her for Saturday off. I respond, "Okay, I'll pass the message on." Karen says to me, "So can I have Saturday off?" I say to her, "I don't know." Karen responds, "Well, can't you check?" I tell her no, and she says, "I don't know why it's so hard. Just look at your mom's diary or calendar or whatever and tell me if I can take the day off." I say to her, "I'm sorry, I can't do that. I don't know what I'm looking at." The Karen would not let it go. She kept pushing me and saying, "I don't know why you're being so difficult. Just tell me." It's at that point I say, "I'm sorry, you really need to speak to my mom. I'm 12 and I have no idea if you can take the day off." Karen then asked, "Well, when's your mother coming home?" I tell her I'm not sure, later tonight, but she didn't say a time. Karen then lets out a huge sigh and says, "Ugh, just tell me I can take Saturday off." I try to tell her again that I'm sorry, I can't help her, and that's when she yells at me and says, "Ugh, you are useless. I'll just talk to your mother tomorrow instead, since you won't help me." She then hung up, and I thought, what the hell? I was mortified since I thought I effed up, but my mom hit the roof when I told her. And after that, she stopped the entire team from calling the home number. And it also turned out that Karen only wanted Saturday off so she and all her friends could go drinking Friday night. And she didn't want to get up for work the next day. Well, don't we all, Karen? But yeah, calling the boss's kid useless is a good way to not get a Saturday off. In fact, if I were the boss and Karen called my house and harassed my child who told her many times they can't authorize a day off, I'd not only give Karen a Saturday off, but I'd give her all her future days off. And for all who happen to be wondering, OP comes into the comments and says, "I forgot to put in the story, but Karen did get the day off. My mom kept a calendar on the wall at work, as well as her diary. So Karen could easily see the day she wanted was available when she got to work the next day. She did have to have a meeting with my mom and another manager though, so they could explain that she couldn't expect a child to act as her manager." I work at a restaurant not far from my town's Walmart, so I go there frequently before or after my shift as a waitress. My uniform consists of a button-up shirt, black pants, and a brown apron with our names and stars on them. With that said, although it doesn't say the name of the restaurant, I would say it would be hard to confuse me for someone wearing a blue or yellow vest with the Walmart logo on the back. With all my trips to Walmart in my uniform, I've been mistaken for an employee 4 times. Usually it's a short conversation of, "Hey, do you know where I can find this product?" And I respond with, "Sorry, actually I don't work here." And they go about their day with a bit more color to their faces. The most recent time it happened, the lady wasn't having it. This occasion happened to be one of my runs before my shift, so I'm just browsing the makeup aisle and I'm squatting down to look at something when Karen walks up and says, "Hey, can you tell me where the tanning oil is?" Now I say my regular response, except I add in that it's probably one aisle over by the sunscreen. And the woman scoffs and says, "Ugh, just show me. They aren't paying you to browse the store and mess around. You're paid to help customers." I say to her, "I'm sorry, but I don't work here and I'm kind of in a hurry to get to work." And that's when Karen says, "You're just too lazy to actually do your job. Besides, you're wearing a uniform." I say to her, "Yes, I'm wearing a uniform for the restaurants I work at." Walmart workers have vests with their logo. It's at that point Karen sees a worker walking by and she says, "Sir, your coworker's being lazy and refuses to help me." Now this guy's about the same age as me, like 18 or 19, and he just looks at me and looks at her and starts laughing. And this really ticks off Karen. The worker says, "Ma'am, she doesn't work here, so please leave the customer alone. But is there anything I can help you with?" At that, Karen storms off without getting her tanning oil, and I thought that was the end of it. I get to the self-checkout with new lipstick, and all of a sudden, she's screaming, "That's the worker right there," while she has this angry manager right behind her. Once she reaches me, Karen has a big smirk on her face, and she tells the manager that I need to be fired immediately. The manager says, "Ma'am, she's not employed here and she never has been, and she's not even wearing our uniform. So please stop harassing her or I will have to ask you to leave the store." That's when Karen suddenly fills with rage as she attempts to lunge at me, but she trips and she runs right into the kiosk. She then starts screaming and bantering about how she's gonna sue them and make them pay for her medical bills, even though there was nothing wrong with her. The manager at this point acts panicked and he pulls out his phone and says, "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'm gonna call an ambulance and I'll get you to the hospital as soon as possible." I then watch as he smirks and dials 911. Though he doesn't ask for an ambulance, the manager calls for police to come get Karen for attempting to assault me and for causing a commotion. Meanwhile, Karen's still sitting there holding her hip like she's gonna die. So fast forward and cops show up a while later, and boy was she surprised. She starts demanding that I be arrested for assault because I shoved her into a kiosk. Of course, the cops want to see the security footage. So while I'm waiting, I take the chance to call my manager and tell him that I'll be late to work. And Karen overhears me saying it and she starts yelling how I need to give it up and that she caught me. A few minutes later, the cops and the manager come out and ask me if I want to press charges. I say yes, he handcuffs her and then brings her out of the store. The manager profusely apologizes and gives me a gift card and personal info just in case I need to get a hold of them. Karen and I will be seeing each other in court. What a ridiculous story, guys, and honestly, I couldn't help but laugh at the audacity of that woman. Like, just picturing her lunging at OP and then stumbling into a kiosk and then crying that she'll sue the store is absolutely hilarious. And what really got me, guys, is she thought an ambulance was coming, but police came instead. Like, don't you guys wish you were there sometimes to see people's faces when cops show up? Okay, so this is my all-time worst experience in my life. It involves cops, an ambulance, and me almost beating the snot out of someone, so prepare. Here is a little backstory. I live in the Midwest. At this point in a small town with a large Catholic community. As a Catholic, I know just how judgmental and holier-than-thou some Catholics can be. I was 24 when this story takes place, but thanks to my baby face, strangers always thought I was 19 years old. I also have a nephew who was 4 at the time. I also worked at the largest, most frequented bank in town, so a lot of people recognized me. This is all important information, so try to remember. Now, if you haven't been to a Hobby Lobby around Christmas, don't. The place is a madhouse, filled with people trying to complete last-minute projects, decorations, or finding gifts. Around holidays is usually the only time that our local small store was busy, with lines trailing. Now, I wouldn't have been there, especially with my nephew who has ADHD and can get hyper when lots of things are going on. But he really wanted to finger paint, and all my paints were dried out. So we went there, and this is where things get screwy. We were waiting in line with our single paint set and some fresh paper when, as these stories go, I heard someone huff behind me. Figuring it's the holidays, with about a week and a half until Christmas, people are probably not in a good mood. And as I said, the store was super busy for a Friday. Again, there's a huff, followed by some foot tapping. But I'm mainly paying attention to my nephew. The woman's clear impatience at the line is beginning to poke at my nerves though, and finally it happens. The Karen says, "Why the hell don't they have more cashiers working? Don't they know we have other places to be?" Now, there are 6 registers, all with cashiers and long lines. Where else was a register supposed to be? No one says a word or looks at the lady, except my rambunctious nephew, who stops talking and stares. I then hear the Karen say, "Shouldn't you be helping?" Thinking the woman's screaming at some other poor worker passing by, I try to slightly discourage my nephew from staring. But he's not paying me the least bit of attention. I can hear the Karen say, "Hello, I'm talking to you." And finally, I realize she means me, and I turn around, preparing for the worst, per usual. I say to her, "What?" She then gestures at everyone standing around, and she says, "Shouldn't you be helping with this?" I say to her, "What do you expect me to do about this?" She says, "Go open another register. They have one in sewing and another one in the frame department, but no one's there. Go open one up. It's Christmas rush, for F's sake." About those registers, they were for looking up items in their sewing pattern catalog or for printing pictures. Neither one had the ability to handle cash transactions. I say to the Karen, I don't work here." Karen says, "Well, no, duh. But this is what you do at the bank, so it shouldn't be that difficult. Just go tell them where you work, and I'm sure they'll let you help." In my mind, I'm thinking, oh yay, she knows me. I then respond, "That's not how it works, and besides, I know cash handling, but I'm not trained on their registers. I wouldn't know how to apply coupons and check people out and stuff." Hearing me say that did seem to stop her, as she was worried that I'd probably charged full price to her on accident. So she gave up for the moment, rolling her eyes and muttering under her breath. Again, my nephew is still staring, as I usually don't find myself in many arguments in front of him. I'm trying to be the good aunt and all, not my usual aggressive self. I am also still trying to stop my nephew from staring before the Karen notices, but it was too late. All of a sudden I hear, "What the hell are you looking at, you little brat?" And I'm thinking, oh, no one talks to my nephew like that. All my nerves have now turned to red-hot anger, and I say, hey, he's a kid. Kids stare when loud-mouthed adults start whining like children. And that prompts Karen to say, "Well, maybe if you hadn't had him as a teen, he might have some actual manners. Single parents don't teach their kids any manners." I say to her, "What did you say?" Karen goes on and says, "That's the problem with today's youth. You can't keep your legs shut, and then you have a child you can't afford, and then you raise it sloppily. Like him." At this point, I want to note that my nephew's clothes are a bit wrinkled, but he doesn't sit still. But they're clean, they have no holes, and they fit him perfectly. Now I'm just as mad because being a teen mother isn't something to blame someone for. It happens despite teaching and good intentions, and it's not a point to ridicule someone over. So I say to the woman, "This is my nephew, not my child, and even if he was, at least I'm gonna teach him how not to be an adult, using you as my prime example." Hearing that, she tries to lunge at me, her face busting veins, and it was red. I guess she didn't like being called out. She then tries to whip her cart out of the way to get to me, but what ends up happening is far, far worse. The cart lunges forward, swings, and then slams my nephew right in the face. The cart not only hit him in the head, but when he fell, you could hear the sound of his skull hitting tile. And oh my goodness, I saw red. All I could think of as he was laying there was, what if he gets severe brain damage or worse? I then turned, fist raised, ready to ensure this woman would be drinking through a straw the rest of her life, when my nephew begins screaming, and I know what that meant: blood. I whipped around to see his nose was bleeding, as well as a spot on top of his head that was beginning to turn red. At this point, I'm not sure what I said, if anything, but I roared loud enough that everyone turned to see what was going on. I grabbed him into my arms and started screaming for ambulance, security, police, anyone. I went full crazy mode. The guy in line behind me shoved Karen out of the way and started trying to help me figure out what was hurting him the worst and calm me down. At this point, I was sobbing, thinking about what this could mean for him, that he could die. It's still the singular worst moment of my life to date, and I'm 28 years old now. I don't know all that happened, but apparently security came and kept the woman there until cops arrived. I had to go with paramedics. I then called my sister, who is his mom, my parents, and my fiance to tell them what's going on. Thankfully, his skull only had a hairline fracture, nothing serious, and no permanent damage. The blood from his scalp was a gash that the cart had made that required staples. His nose was also broken, and they had to set it. He ended up with 2 swollen black eyes on top of a bald patch where the gash was. My family was shocked by the fact that I left the woman breathing. They expected cops to arrive and cart me off, but luckily my buddy came first. The woman was arrested for attempted battery because she tried to strike me with an object. and multiple charges for hurting my nephew. She got 7 years in prison, plus 3 years probation, and she was forced to pay the cost of all medical bills. I tell you, this was the worst experience of my life, and it could have gone much worse too. I'm not a violent person until you hurt someone I love, and that's when things can get ugly. Guys, holy crap. All that happened because she couldn't patiently wait in line, and what a mistake that was. And guys, when I read that little guy's skull hit the floor with a thud, my heart frickin' sank. And I'm so glad to hear that OP's nephew just walked away with minor injuries. And I've said this before, it always makes me so mad when kids get involved in crazy Karen interactions. And I really hope she learned her lesson. OP does come back with a comment that says, "My nephew's almost 8 now, and he's an absolutely amazing kid. He loves life, there's not a shy bone in him, and he's super sweet. He's developed a phobia of blood, and if he cuts himself, he passes out or vomits. Other than that, and the scar on his head, he's doing great." Alright, so I came across this sub recently and I fell in love with the belligerent idiots you guys have to deal with, and I wanted to share my own idiot with you. So before the ensuing accident, I worked at this trampoline park for roughly a year. My position was court monitor, which meant that you monitored the open jump area, also the basketball dunking area, the dodgeball area, foam pit, and obstacle course. Now, after working there for a year, I knew the place, the employees, and the regulars through and through. I was especially sympathetic to my fellow monitors as we had 6-hour rotating shifts, with only one 20-minute break to rest amid the screaming kids and the crappy music being blasted over the speakers. So one day, about a month after I left, I went in to have some fun and to get some exercise. My favorite station is by far the dodgeball court, so I head there and start messing around. The court monitors also shift positions around the place every 20 minutes to keep things from getting monotonous. So after that period of time, someone else comes to our station. For the moment, there are roughly 15 people playing, with a large group of 12 to 14-year-olds and a couple of older teens and 20-somethings. That's when a new monitor comes in, and he's someone I recognize. He was a relatively new hire. We worked together for a bit before I left, a young kid named Aaron. For 2 minutes, everything goes fine, but then the poor kid gets a very sickened look on his face. The guy pulls me aside and says he has to excuse himself. Now, given my status as a recent ex-employee, he asked me to cover and ref the game while he takes care of whatever was bugging him. The guy looked like he was about to puke. I asked if he wanted to grab the shift leader, but he said they were stretched to the limit already. So we agreed. If the shift leader, who's a great lady named Shannon, came around, I would explain things to her and sort stuff out, as she knows I'm capable. So with that, Aaron hurries off, looking pale, and I begin refereeing the game. None of the players minded the least. They just wanted to hit each other with the balls. Everything continues smoothly for another couple of minutes until D-Bag Dad arrives with his 8-year-old son. Now, it might seem presumptuous to call the dad this, but let me explain why. His kid, who we'll call Kevin, was dressed like everyone else, including me. Gym shorts, t-shirts, and some padded socks to grip the trampoline. Meanwhile, D-Bag Dad was wearing black tights, a black long-sleeve Under Armour shirt, a black headband, and the best part of all, he was wearing grip gloves, like the ones you wear for football, all for an effing dodgeball game on trampolines, against people half his age. Now, right away, I knew there would be a problem because this kid was far too young to be playing on the court. We had a 12 and under court right beside us, and little Kevin barely topped my waist. So I point this out to D-Bag Dad, but the guy just said, "Nah, he can take it." And that's always a good sign. So D-Bag Dad and his son hop on the court, and I start the game. Dad gets knocked out in less than 10 seconds. He tries to catch a rather slow-moving ball, and he fumbled it, despite his state-of-the-art gloves. So the guy moves off to the side of the court where I'm standing, and he begins coaching his son while berating the other side like it's a pro football game. The guy's screaming, "Come on, Kevin, give him hell, don't crouch, move, 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 duck, dodge." The guy just stalked the sideline, clapping his padded gloves, while poor Kevin did his best to avoid some of the harder throws. The kid's sides did keep him from being beamed like his dad, and some of the guys playing through college baseball levels of speed. Once again, I suggested the 12 and under court would be better, but D-Bag Dad wasn't hearing this. He says to me, "My son can handle it." Those idiots have nothing on my son. I politely asked him to be nice, and you can imagine how that went over. D-Bag Dad grew more and more livid. As the game continued, he actually starts to try and call out some of the kids who hadn't been close to getting hit. The guy gets so serious and screams at me, "Come on, Raph, didn't you see that? Kevin nailed that son of a bitch." Kevin could barely throw the entire length of the court. I didn't say that, but I did ask Dad to stop cursing once again, because this was a family establishment, and he was treating the game of trampoline dodgeball like the Super Bowl. But the guy was deaf. Maybe his black headband was too tight. At this point, the kids who had been hit had wandered off because the tight-wearing man-child was hopping around screaming like a banshee. He kept screaming at his kid, "Let's go, Kevin, dodge, dodge, dodge." The guy clapped his hands together with each dodge, and he screamed, "He's out," in my ear several times when a kid on the other team got hit. And then the inevitable happened. Little Kevin got hit. Dad's guidance did not work after all. And honestly, I just felt bad for the kid for having this kind of father. But watching one of the older teens send a rocket that blasted Kevin square in the nose and seeing Dad's face go from red to purple was beautiful. The kid got knocked off his feet. He was blown over like a rag doll. Now, I do want to note that the balls themselves are sort of soft rubber, so they won't break anything, but they can sting. So Kevin curls up with his hands over his face while Dad storms over to the poor teen who hits him, and he gets right up in his face and says, "What the F, man? Why the hell would you do that? Who the F throws a ball at a kid?" D-Bag Dad begins to get physical by shoving the teen who looked incredibly apologetic. The kid was trying to play the game. I watched the dad shove the kid again, and that's when I intervened by stepping between them and calmly told the dad about the rules once again, while pointing to his son saying, "You said he could handle it. This stuff happens all the time, alright? Let's just calm down. We'll get him some ice, relax, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon." And that's when D-Bag Dad says, "F you. I want to speak to the manager right now. Your ass is gonna be gone." Dad vents as he yanks his son to their feet and pulls him off the court. Kevin actually looks fine now, but still a bit stunned and red, but no worse for wear. Everyone else is watching Dad and I shrug and say, "You'll find Shannon in the office behind the counter, but you really should get some ice for..." He then interrupts me and says, "I said F you, don't talk to me," and then drags Kevin behind him and they disappear. At this point, I'm worried about Aaron, the guy who left me in charge, because he might get the rap for this. So I figure just continuing as we were is the best bet, and the trouble can come to us. And it took about 5 minutes. The dad comes back with a grin plastered on his face, with Kevin holding an ice bag to his face, thank goodness. He also has Sharon, the shift leader, and Aaron in tow. Sharon says, "Hey, OP, this guy here was telling me that you allowed his son to get injured on the court?" I actually laughed at that, shook my head and said, "No, he said his son was more than capable of playing with a 12 and up group." I recommended the 12 and under, of course, but he refused. He also antagonized several of the other players, and he called them pieces of crap, insulted them, and he actually pushed a kid. Dad's smug look faded a bit as some of the other players backed me up. He begins protesting again, saying we're all liars because we're young and we're ganging up on him. I could tell that Shannon and Aaron were both convinced by my version, while the dad just splutters through some crappy series of excuses. Then his son tugs his hand and asks him if they could just go do something else. I felt really bad for the kid. He had more maturity than his father. Dad then finally demands the inevitable. He says, "I hope you fire this prick," pointing to me, "or I'm gonna sue this place." I can't help grinning as I asked, "For what? For you letting your son get nailed with a dodgeball, or you sucking at it?" The dad turns purple again, but before he gets another word in, Shannon breaks the news and says, "Hey, he doesn't work here. He was just helping out my employee who had a health emergency." She gets to the point in saying that she doesn't want anyone pressing charges, and basically asked us both if we're both okay with letting it go. I said I'm fine with this, especially considering D-Bag's kid was the real victim. D-Bag agrees, but he decides he'll never return here again, as it's unworthy of his patronage. I saw him there a week later, and the guy still couldn't catch a ball. But his son did play with the 12 and under group, so I guess it's a lesson sort of learned. Yeah, so the post ends right there, guys, but I really hope Kevin turns out okay. He seemed like such a good kid with an overzealous father. And with that said, I'm actually surprised the guy harassed and put his hands on a minor and was still allowed in the establishment. Like, as nice as I believe Shannon is, I feel she didn't do her job properly. Like, the guy shoved a teenager twice, guys. Like, what's stopping him from doing it again to an even younger kid? But guys, that's not my business. I have no control over that matter. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /IDontWorkHereLady. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, subscribe so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/entitled people where Karens can't keep their hands to themselves and they're getting arrested. Go check it out, and myself and Stevie will see you guys in the next one. We love you.